Township of Garfield. First item is Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I don't see Ann tonight, so John, are you going to take a roll for us?
Yes, Agustinelli,
Here.
Robertson,
Here.
Racine,
Here.
the Good. Here. Fudge.
Here.
Klein.
Here.
McManus.
Here. All right. Next item is public comment. So we do have public comment at the beginning and at the end of our meetings. So, we don't have any public hearings tonight. So if there's anything anybody would like to come forward and address with the board, now would be the time to do that. And as often the case, I don't see anybody running forward, so we'll close public comment, the first one, and move on to review and approval of the agenda. And if you have any conflicts of interest, now would be the time to state those.
Make a motion to approve the agenda presented.
Support.
Motion made and supported to approve the agenda as presented. Any further discussion on that? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. In your packet were the minutes from our May 8th regular meeting. Anybody have any comments or corrections they'd like to see made to those minutes?
Make a motion that we adopt the minutes.
Support. Motion made and supported to adopt the minutes as presented. Any further discussion on that motion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. John, any correspondence for us tonight?
There is no correspondence.
Okay. We'll move on to reports. Molly, any town board reports?
No report.
No report. Planning Commissioner, so ZBA?
We did have a meeting last week on our residents. There's a couple of neighbors were having a little feud. One guy pulled a permit to reshape his front yard, do some lawn work and some driveway work. Anyway, he did such a good job, all the water runs on his neighbor's property. So we listened to them for a couple hours, and the long story short is we told the guy to go back and do it right.
Okay.
So he'll be back.
Not the first, probably won't be the last, so.
Right.
Chris, anything from Parks and Rec?
We haven't met.
John, Joint Planning Commission?
No meetings since our last report.
Okay, sounds good. Staff, any reports?
I think the only couple of things will be do our master plan announcement, as we've been doing lately. Still in the review period, or kind of approaching the end of the review period. At our next meeting on June 12th is the scheduled public hearing for the master plan, but it's still up on the website if anyone wants to take a look at it. Under the planning department, master plan update. But otherwise, we're kind of nearing the end of that process. And the other thing is that we've also been doing some by right site plan reviews in the planning department. We were kind of adjusting some work plans in our end of the office, and so we've started doing those, I think, probably when we do our monthly reports to the township board. We always do kind of a status on each of the things we're reviewing. We can start adding those to that report as well.
All right. Thank you. That'd be nice to see those. So we get questions about things that are going on, and I always tell them it's, well, it's either in Blair, so, or something like that, but it's or it's a use by right, and we don't see it here. So keep us up to date. It'd be great.
Yeah, I think it's really important for the implementation of the master plan and for the planning commission to be aware of all these other projects that are going on, because there's quite a bit of work happening in the township at this time.
Great. Yeah. Okay.
That's all I had.
Thanks, Steve. Okay, moving on, unfinished business, Planning Department report 2024-31, the master plan potential implementation projects, some discussion and prioritization. Who's going to take this one?
Yeah, I'm going to kind of cover the first page, and then Steve's going to cover the second page. But what we wanted to do is kind of continue our discussion that we had at the study session from last month to kind of now start to hone in a little bit on some ideas that we have for some changes to the zoning ordinance and as in terms of implementation efforts for the master plan, and along with some adjustments that we just think are needed for the zoning ordinance text. So these are just, again, we're further discussion, bouncing these off the planning commission to kind of get your feedback, give us a little bit of sense of direction on how you want to go on some of these things. And so your feedback to us will be really helpful in terms as we work towards actually drafting some language. We have some ideas here. We're not, we don't have to follow these ideas. We just think these are some things that we've kind of thought through that we think might be helpful. But if you got other ideas, or if you're not comfortable with some of these things, just let us know and we can kind of shoot into a different direction. But this feedback is really helpful for us. I wanted to kind of cover two areas related to implementation of the master plan. One is dealing with housing and how our master plan, as well as the township strategic plan, point to providing a balance of housing choices and housing types within the township. And one of the areas that we can really do that, we feel, is looking again at our R3 zoning district. And this one is a district that gets has been getting our most activity in terms of some of the residential development. And we thought there would be some ways to streamline it a little bit more. One of the things in the R3 district, if a multifamily unit is anything of 3 units or more. So a single family dwelling and a duplex are permitted in this district, but they're not subject, they're just basically, you get a land use permit and go forward with your project. But if you do a triplex or greater, that requires a special use permit. So we thought, knowing that a lot of multifamily developments, the complexities of some of these aren't that great, we thought there could be some different ways of approaching them. One of the things we thought is the triplex, which is a 3-unit home, or a quadplex, which is a 4-unit home, could be permitted by right in the R3 district. These are areas already zoned for multifamily, expected that they would be located in there. By right, they would require administrative review. So that would be something that planning department staff would review prior to them going to get a land use permit. Just kind of going through these other bullet points, it's kind of a scale of sorts. So then we thought for multifamily housing developments, and we started with just a range, it could be different, of 5 to 12, that those would also be administrative review, but they would be done with special conditions. So in the ordinance, in every district, typically we have uses permitted by right, uses permitted with special conditions, and then uses that are special use permit. So these would be, we would develop special conditions on which they would apply to those administratively reviewed developments, multifamily developments that would be up to 12 units. So that was something that we were thinking as a way to kind of streamline the process. The last kind of one is, well, we would have to change the, redefine a dwelling, multifamily dwelling based on this, for a special use permit. Basically, how this is laid out would be anything 13 units or more. And those are just numbers that were just as placeholders, just to kind of get the discussion started. The other part is, we thought that there may be the ability for the planning commission to have, in those special use permits, to review things and to alter the densities should they feel it. Similar to recently with 3066 North Garfield, where there was the commercial district housing. There is a provision in there which did allow the planning commission to increase the density. There could be some ability for that in the R3 district at the purview of the planning commission to maybe alter that. Maybe there could be some standards put to that or some limitations as well. But those were just some of the broad changes or some of the specific changes that we thought might be of interest to the planning commission related to the R3.
Anybody have any questions for John? Yeah, go ahead.
I think I totally concur with the first two, the triplex and the quadplex. I guess my first thought, though, for things of 5 or more, I'm more comfortable, I think, if that came to the full commission rather than just be administratively reviewed. That's not a tiny project. And I think we ought to have some responsibility to look at that and as commissioners. And I don't think we're likely to see a whole bunch of those. If it turned out over the course of a couple of years, we're seeing more than I'm thinking we're going to see. And if they're mostly things that we really don't need to dwell on, then maybe we could tweak this ordinance once again and maybe make them an administrative review at that point. But for now, I'd be more comfortable if the commission has to look at the things for more than a quadplex.
Would that be something that would be done? Could that be a use by special condition that could go to the planning commission? Would it be still requiring a special use permit, or could that be done similar to where we have uses like in the planned shopping center or commercial highway, still requires planning commission approval, but it doesn't require a public hearing process? Or would you prefer to keep it as an SUP?
I haven't thought of that. What do other people think?
For clarification, we're talking about triplex, quadplex, and 5 to 12 dwelling units, one single structure on a single lot. So it would have to be zoned appropriately, and it would be any one of those sizes of housing, but it would be one structure, single lot, not 4 or 5. You know, when you get into multiple triplexes or multiple quadplexes or multiple 5 to 12 dwelling units, that's a development that we would review.
Right, because we would take it in total number of what are, like you could have, let's say, 5 fourplexes or something like that. That would not be what's considered here as a, you know, a quadplex or a fourplex. You're right. It would basically just be one quadplex on one lot.
I mean, I think I'm in agreement with John that, you know, the triplex and the quadplex, those could be staff reviewed for single one-off developments. And maybe streamline it with a, what did you say, a conditional review?
So we have a review with special conditions.
Special conditions, so that they come and they have to check the boxes and we look at it, and maybe that would be practical, because I could see a one-off single structure development, you know, I could see us streamlining. I'm not really sure how many of them those there are going to be.
We haven't had too many. Most of them that have come in have been the larger complexes. I'm just thinking Aspen Pines, which was done just right before I started here, that was I think that's an 8 unit.
I think there's only 8 units.
And
in
then
that, yeah.
The Garfield one, that was the 3066, that was, what did we ended up with that? How many?
I think it's more than 12. It was like
Yeah.
18 to 20-ish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that wouldn't apply either. So no, we have not had many. So.
Have applicants, are you aware of potential applications that have been deterred because of having to get the, you know, the more detailed approval by our approval process?
I don't think so. I think with this, you know, this special use permit process, sometimes I think they, you know, they don't like the idea of having to go through 3 meetings, but I think once they go through it, it's not that bad. I think, quite honestly, when a developer comes through us, this is the process, getting the planning commission approval on some of these things is something that they can feel it should be shorter and easier. But really, I think they're dealing with a lot of other issues in their whole development process, that this is, quite honestly, is not that big of a deal, particularly if they started earlier on in the process. there's usually other issues that are coming up. I think it's just one that they feel like shouldn't be that difficult, but I don't know, we find that when we go through the process, that time does allow for things to get sorted out appropriately. So it does kind of help to go through that, and it's not as onerous as it might appear initially.
I agree that the 3 and the 4 would probably be okay without it, but I think the 5 and 12 should continue having the special use permit. And so it'd be the 3 meetings, and with a public hearing.
Okay.
That's my opinion, but on the 5 to 12.
You think they need a public hearing?
Well, I'd like to see it,
I mean,
yeah.
you're already in an R3, so, for a lot of the neighbors to come in and converse about,
That's our biggest
12,
problem
yeah.
right now is the
yeah. But I
People
can
from
go
the-
either way on it. I'm not married to
Trespassing.
either of them, but John, if you guys are saying you want to kind of streamline some of the process, we still can do the conditions, but maybe we don't need a public hearing. I'll just throw that out.
Or you could lower it, so maybe it's 8 units or less, doesn't require a public hearing. And then maybe, that's the other thing, you could maybe lower that number, so maybe the threshold is more than 8 units requires a public hearing, special use permit process.
And the public hearing is kind of so people can come in and say, we don't like this, but you're already in an R3, so you know you're going to have something more than one.
Well, if we went to the review without the public hearing, are the neighbors still noticed about the hearing and about the review?
They are not.
I'm thinking about it a little more, and it's occurring to me that because these are, imagining it being a parcel of property that's big enough for 5 to 12 units on it, and 5 to 12 parking to support it, and very likely in our community adjacent to at least one, if not more, single-family homes that might, and I guess my thought is, it's one thing to streamline the process for the developer, and then the neighbor doesn't know anything until the shovel's going in the ground to build a 5 to 12 unit multifamily housing. Whereas if we stick to the process we have, takes a little longer for the developer, but that public hearing can be valuable for folks to come in. I mean, many times we've had people come in and voice their concerns, and the developer steps up and says, yeah, I can put some more vegetation along the property line, and the neighbor leaves happier, satisfied that they've been heard, and that something additional has been done. I think in terms of that process, leaving it in place for the bigger units, a duplex, or a triplex, a quadplex, maybe not as critical, because there are not many new neighbors moving in, not that perception of density. I was starting to feel, I think the public hearing's important.
What's the magic number? I guess, I mean,
I think once you hit 5,
public hearing after 5? I mean, I don't think we're going to hold anybody up that much on having a public hearing, I don't think.
I think I'd be comfortable with trying that too, and we can always tweak
We
it.
can
If
always
we
change
try
it.
it and we found that was problematic for one reason or another, we can always adjust it again, but rather than not go too far, too fast and regret it.
Well, that is making a change. I mean, that would be, 3 or 4 right now, which requires a special use permit, would be alleviated of that. So it is a change.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll do that. We'll define triplex dwelling and quadplex dwelling, which would be both permitted in the R3 district by right. And then anything 5 units or greater will remain as a special use permit. We will have to adjust that multifamily dwelling to recognize that change, that it's 5 or more versus right now it's 3 or more. What about the issue related to the flexibility and density? You had a project coming in here and an applicant wanted a higher number of units for a specific site, and would you feel comfortable with that? We could also put some parameters to that, so where it would give some guidance to the planning commission, so the planning commission isn't just boosting density, but could say, well, if these conditions exist, it does afford the planning commission some flexibility.
You know, it comes to mind is when there's always been a trade-off for density for special amenities or other things that they provide. I think we'd miss that if we didn't have the review and possibly even the public hearing on that. But, you know, we've been flexible on density, but we've also required things that kind of offset that, in our opinion, so.
We could do that, if you wanted, we could say something to the effect of, and I'm not sure how we would word that, but maybe there are provisions for open space or other amenities to the site that you would allow, the planning commission would allow.
I don't know if there were R3 or there were maybe PUDs or PURDs, you know, that we were working with.
And there's language, I think, in the
Yeah.
PUD section and in the commercial district housing section that have been used. I'm thinking of the 3066 Garfield that ended up with higher density than most things in R3 because of like using the language in that section that could be mirrored, and if we decided to amend the R3 to put that in there.
So at least there's kind of a trade-off.
Yeah, that might not be a bad idea. I think we'd want to word it in such a way that increased density is going to be the exception rather than the rule.
Yeah.
And they don't look at the, whatever language we've got, think, well, it says we could have more density, we get more density. If we word it more like in settings where there's usable open space larger than required or whatever, then the planning commission may, has discretion to grant more density, and maybe there's other stuff besides open space, or other amenities, or in certain circumstances. I don't know how you phrase it, because
Right.
it
We
doesn't
can
need to
take a
be
look at it.
objective. We don't want to be picking
Right.
favorites, and you get it and I don't, and that kind of thing, but I think we'd want to start with the assumption that they don't get more density than what the ordinance calls for, unless something.
It's an exception, a special exception.
We could, I mean, I think probably what we try to do if we put some language together is somehow that it be measurable. So that, I mean, obviously, let's say you increase a development by 10% in terms of its density, that whatever additional amenities or whatever that they're providing, somehow to quantify that, because otherwise it's subjective, and that would, you know, at least, and I'm not sure what that is, but we'll take a look.
Yeah, you could take a look, take a stab, and then we'll take a look at what you guys come up with, and
Yeah.
tweak it some more, sure.
Okay.
I think it's tricky because, you're right, John, and I think you said it too, Joe, that if you create the density flexibility, then everybody's going to come in wanting the full flexibility. And I think the trick is in the language, such that it's almost like I'm thinking it's exponential, which we haven't really had before, where, you know, the more density they want, the more stuff they have to do to get there. And if it's, tricky part's the language, so it's spelled out in there so that they know that coming in, because more often than not, feels like we just kind of do some horse trading for the density that they want, and we get there, but.
And then the developer usually brings in previous decisions we made and uses those as examples on how they justify their
Yeah.
density.
Yeah.
So I think we definitely need the parameters within that.
But I like the idea of some flexibility to provide some more housing.
All right, we'll
Give
take
you
a
enough
stab
work
at
on
that.
there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no,
That's
this
good
is really
direction.
good for the R3 district. I think it kind of gives us some changes here, and we'll see how they go. I think it's always helpful.
Okay.
The next part is the mixed-use centered zoning district, and I think at this time, we've pretty much agreed that we're going to hold off on really developing that. We're kind of seeing how this process goes with the Cherryland Center, because one of the things that we're requiring in there is the comprehensive development plan, which is currently a ability for the planning commission to require that in the CP district. And I think it would be really helpful for us to kind of go through that process so we can kind of see all that's needed in that comprehensive development plan, because I think it's going to be a little bit more robust than a typical site plan. So for instance, in the case of the Cherryland Center, we have various property owners, and we've already indicated to them, as a matter of fact, when I met with the three major parties last summer, said that, I think to get this redeveloped, ultimately, we're going to need an update for the comprehensive development plan, which was last done in 1998. And as part of that, it's more than just a typical site plan that the Planning Commission sees. There are things such as the shared parking, the cross-access arrangements, shared utilities such as stormwater and so forth, lighting plan. All those things have to be coordinated in a way that makes it almost kind of like a light version of a PUD in a way. So I think going through that process with them will help us to understand if this were to be a true, more robust mixed-use district. We want to make sure some of those standards are embedded in that district to ensure that should this be applied in other areas within the township, that it meets our requirements. So, and if I could just for a minute on the Cherryland Center is if you want, I can kind of give you a little update on what's happening there.
I was gonna ask, because it was just in the ticker today.
Yeah, no, some of that was news to us, so I want to clarify. I want to clarify some things as from our point, and actually I was kind of waiting to hear or report to the Planning Commission this evening, because I do want to respond to some of those parties. Because we did, like I said, had a conversation last year that the CP district does allow the Planning Commission to update that overall site plan. And the last time that was in '98, that's when they converted it from an indoor mall to a commercial strip center. So a lot has changed since then. And with all these activities going in, we really need to have that overall plan. In the case of the former Sears, the K1 Indoor Kart Racing Center, if you go there now, they are working on that. High Tops, which is a bar restaurant, is from what we hear is going in there. I know they requested in the township board approved relocating their liquor license request to that location. There is space for them, but to do that, they are going to have to come back in front of the Planning Commission. So they'll have to take that K1 site plan that you saw back in December of 2022, come back, have that additional space in there. There were some site improvements that were deferred. So for instance, they put some landscape islands in on the back side. Those are going in. They're going to need to do some additional ones that we kind of deferred until the second phase of that old building was built out. So they do need to come in front of the Planning Commission to have an amended site plan to get approval. Kind of moving across next to the former Yonkers, this is one that you're going to see at your next meeting on June 12th, is the Two Brothers Dog Park, Cafe, and Tap House. They're coming for a conceptual review. So this is one that we have concerns with because all the reuses of those buildings have remained to the original footprint. This one is going to reuse a portion of the Yonkers. And then they're going to also use a portion of the parking lot on the north side of the Yonkers, where they're going to have an outdoor dog park, roughly about 5,500 square feet. That basically they'll remove the parking lot, and this is just concepts, which you'll see at your meeting, but use that for an outdoor space. When I spoke with the owners last year, said, we would like to see that updated comprehensive development plan when there's any new building construction, addition, or creation of any new parcels or condominium units. In our mind, they are now going beyond the footprint of the original Cherryland Center. So this, in our mind, I would require that comprehensive development plan to be done beforehand. Because this, otherwise we get into the slippery slope where they start kind of bumping into each other. So I think the time is now. I have provided the owner of Yonkers with all of the plans that have been approved for that whole Cherryland Center to date. So they have that information. The I gave him the contact information to the engineer that did the plans for both the former Sears and the former Kmart, so there's ability to use the same firm to kind of build that comprehensive development plan. But I think the planning commission needs to see that before we do more, so before we start seeing stuff kind of bumped out of the original footprint. And then the former Kmart, some of those things we've heard from the Curling Center, which still owns the Kmart. We do know that it is their goal to kind of have a multi-use building and eventually to have a condominium organized for the multiple owners in that facility. They are looking at some other things like the golf, the 24/7 golf, which I think also includes pickleball. They're looking to include that in there. We have not seen anything that will require an amendment to that site plan. The TSO thing should be, I think they finally met all the requirements for that since the Planning Commission approved that some time ago. But there are some other uses. We did meet with them a while back related to housing, but they weren't prepared to present anything formally. But they are looking at some of the portions of that to do some multifamily housing. That kind of, again, that type of development outside of the footprint of that building are going to require that comprehensive development plan and any amendments to it. Some of the other things they mentioned, like roller rink, they've also mentioned like a furniture store and that type of thing. Those things that we can work with them on that. Again, amending that site plan for that former Kmart building is critical to that. Not just the comprehensive development plan alone, but also the agreements that go with it to address cross-access, stormwater, parking lot maintenance, lighting, signage, all have to be in a coordinated manner. Some of those are going to have to be agreements that they're going to have to develop amongst themselves, that we are going to want to ensure that are in place as this thing kind of gets repurposed. I think we've had very good cooperation from all the owners to date. It's just that we have some expectations, and it's for their benefit, quite honestly, to making sure that they're not bumping into each other. I think we're kind of getting at that point where I think they had some good momentum. The township's been very supportive of that, but we do need to make sure that we have some protections in place for all the property owners in there, and ensuring not just the main ones that I mentioned, but also the outlots and so forth, that those are all functioning properly, and traffic flow, emergency access for emergency vehicles, that type of thing is all maintained.
A question on some of that. So when they bring in this development plan, there's not going to be a developer. It's going to be all of them. Is there an entity that we can go back to and say, well, yeah, you said you were going to do lighting this way, but you're doing it this way? Or, do we have to, are we meeting with each one of these individually, or are they forming an association, or it's kind of a hybrid to do it with all these different owners. They are separate.
Correct.
So you got to put an island in. Who's going to pay for that? Who's going to maintain it? If it looks, all those kinds of things. Are they moving in that direction of forming some kind of a formal group, or they are just all kind of doing their own?
I see it as three main parties that have to come up with that agreement. So there is a cross-access agreement that was put in place back in 1983 between Showstack, who owned the mall at the time, and Sears. They're living off of that. They need to create essentially a brand new agreement. But in that form, that would be where those parties would sign on to that agreement. So that agreement in itself would address all the different issues. And it's similar to what we've seen with other projects where we have like maintenance agreements and that type of thing between multiple parties that have, different development sites that they all work together. So I don't believe they're creating, heard them creating an actual entity, but that agreement itself will be the vehicle by which we will require that. And this, to me, is the only way that you can really manage these issues collectively, along with the plan itself, the site plan, so.
Interesting to see.
Yeah. And there's kind of four main topic areas that we're anticipating that agreement would cover that are shared between those sites. Is shared parking that crisscross over the ownership lines, the shared access from 31, or not 31, South Airport and Garfield, shared connectivity between the internal drives, shared signage if they go in together on signage, because this is still considered a one development, to have some kind of shared signage. All the ones that have brought their own individual sign requests here, we've been denied, and we've been bringing that up. And then shared stormwater, because that still dates back to that development, so that would still need to carry forward to any new development.
Do you think all of the major owners are now prepared to spend the money and do what you're saying we want them to do, a comprehensive development plan, or are you going to get pushback on this, or are they going to do it?
Originally, I wasn't sure, but I think now we're at a position, because I think they realize, because of the activity that's gone out there, there's interest in making investments into that. And I think one thing that's really helped is that we've been fairly flexible with them, because we realize that this is not going to be a retail center like it was. It's going to be mixed use. There's going to be some retail. There's going to be entertainment uses, potentially. I think they all have their eyes on the idea of doing residential, and it's like, well, wait a minute, you're not there yet, but you could be there if you work together. So I have had good cooperation from all three parties.
Good.
And one of the things we've talked about them as a nice carrot is they have no freestanding signs out there, other than what's the remainder of that one on South Airport. To get people into that interior areas, particularly to the rear, we've said you could, if you come up with a sign plan, that's a nice, you got to work together, but that will allow for you to get some freestanding signs out on Garfield and South Airport. So that's an incentive for them as well. And so I've been fairly happy with the response so far. I just need them to actually follow up. So the conversations have begun. They just need to deliver the goods. So
Remind me, there were three owners. Two of those original three owners have sold, and there's still one original owner?
there are no original owners.
All the original owners are gone.
Yes, Showstack was the last. They're out of it.
So you're dealing with all new,
Correct.
that's good news. Okay, I didn't realize that, great.
Yes. And I think they all want to do some positive stuff, so I think it's going to complement and it's going to work together, so it's just keeping it coordinated for the benefit of all of them, quite frankly.
Or that group that comes in to talk to us about a conceptual review, it's obviously premature to react to it, but even if we like it, we're going to have to tell them probably time out for quite a while this other stuff has to happen.
That would be my recommendation. That's where, and I've told the other owners, I said, I'm good with you guys repurposing the interior buildings, but when you start changing the footprint, and the outlots are a little bit different because those are really, don't impact the interior flow. They really stay to the edge. But this building here, it can get, particularly since it's odd kind of shaped and everything, could impact some of the redevelopment efforts there.
Which we anticipate, we just need to see the comprehensive plan to how it's all going to work together.
So I think going through this process will really help us to understand what it takes to actually have a, improved mixed-use centered district. So we're going to kind of just see this is kind of a good experiment, and seeing those elements that we're going to learn from this, they're going to learn from this, and I think it's moving in a positive direction. But before we jump into creating something hypothetical and in anticipation, we can say, well, we've learned from this, and we can ensure that the new creation of this district will be better by going through this process.
Just a question. This is out in the weeds. Can they go up another story or two on top of those buildings?
Yeah, I don't know, there is a height requirement, I think it's 4 stories in that
So
in
that's
CP
a
district.
possibility in the
Yes,
future.
they could go vertical.
Some of that in the airport, does that affect any of that? Because some of that's in the airport approach
Yeah.
area too.
I think it be the way that I don't think it is, I think they're like kind of at the corner. So
So not
I'm just thinking the east-west runway is the big one, but I think they're far
South
enough
of that.
south of that where it doesn't impact
They
them.
just might miss the approach
Yeah.
area.
Now, that could change when they get into the whole airport zoning thing, but as I understand right now, they could do it. They still need sign-off to go vertical, but I think there's the ability for them to do that. I know there's been conversations of having a hotel at that site, for instance, and we believe that could be a possibility, should they get
Talk
down
of a
to it.
hotel over there for a long time. It's like, you got the airport, where's
Yeah.
the nearest hotel to the airport?
Park and ride.
It's miles, so it would make sense to do something there with a hotel. Well, there's no shortage of hotels being built in this town. I just stuck in over there, so. All right, thanks, John, I appreciate it. Any other questions on that piece? Otherwise, I think Steve gonna handle the next section?
Yeah,
Yes.
so some of the other ones, we consider those two kind of like the big projects, like looking at like R3 or CP as a whole district. Some of these other ones are for other parts of the ordinance, looking at either smaller things or specific standards, or some cleanup ones. Lighting, we've talked about a little bit, I think specifically focusing on some of the new lighting, either types or technologies, like the building accent lighting. And then clarifying how we want to require a photometric plan. They're very useful for determining if other lighting requirements are met, because you get the whole layout of the site and is there any light trespass onto the sides. So just sort of clarifying the language on how we want to require that or when that's required. And then shielding light source, whether it is building accent lighting or interior or exterior. That's when we were discussing ones like we have a really bright light, but it's inside. So it's include that on a photometric plan if you account for it in some way. But otherwise, like, we were just kind of reviewing internally, weren't really looking at any of the other technical standards that are in there right now, just kind of focusing on these other aspects. I don't know what Planning Commission thinks, if they want to dive into anything else, but kind of focusing a little bit might be more appropriate for right now, just to deal with those newer things. Drive-throughs, two of the things that we've seen are wanting to do some kind of, or require potentially like some kind of design analysis or some kind of analysis of the drive-through itself, kind of in the spirit of a traffic impact analysis, although not looking at the traffic necessarily. This sort of harkens back to when we reviewed a couple of those on 31, and there was especially that 7 brew because it was so close to the major intersection, turning left in and out of there, and how that might happen. And I think we got review from like our own traffic engineer, theirs, and MDOT to like weigh in on that. So somehow just clarifying, make sure we get answers to what we're looking for. And the other part of drive-through is it's written in there right now, there's a 60-foot setback requirement. It says from the right-of-way line of any existing or proposed street. And I think, interpret that as to the building. I don't think it says that explicitly. And that happens to be more than the minimum front yard setback for any district that allows a drive-through. And if it doesn't actually state building, do they mean building, or does it mean to the drive-through lane, to the drive-through window, it's a little ambiguous. So at least some clarity, or if there's already language elsewhere for setbacks, is that requirement even needed in there? But since we've reviewed a lot of drive-throughs, and there could likely be more down the line someday, to just clarify that one. For food choice, any questions on anything by any means, just stop me.
On drive-throughs, I would say if we tweak the setback, I mean, it's, what it always seems to come back to on some of these is the stacking, you know, how many cars can be stacked and where are they stacked? You know, Chick-fil-A comes to mind, obviously. But, you know, make sure, maybe if we're gonna look at that area, that's something we look at. You know, there's some stacking requirements that are more clear and
Right.
defined.
Because theirs were, I remember Chick-fil-A voluntarily gave far more than what a requirement was, but they kind of knew their own operation pretty well.
Yeah, they needed it too, so.
Yeah.
And we don't know what the impact of that hotel is gonna be on that.
Did we
Right.
mention last week or last meeting the Chick-fil-A meeting with Chick-fil-A?
No, we can do that
Okay.
another time.
We can do, yeah, all right. At least one party interested in that connection between all of the ones behind on 31.
Yeah.
That's about all it is at the moment, but
Yeah.
a place to start.
One at
So,
a time. We'll get
yeah.
That, one of the things that we were thinking with kind of having that drive-through design analysis is to find out what that number should be. Like, because it's kind of hard to, certainly for fast food, I think, we require 12 spaces. And collectively, I don't know if that's a good number anymore. I mean, because we have such demand for drive-throughs, that's where we're thinking if we had somebody like an engineer or whatever could help us, quantify what is the right number. I don't know. I don't know how you get to that.
How many hamburgers you sell?
Well, that's what I mean.
Exactly, that's what I was gonna say. It's not an
What's the
engineering.
volume?
Right.
not
I
an
guess
engineering
engineering, I was
problem.
thinking more for the layout and flow, but in terms of quantity, I don't know what that is.
I mean, I think the layout and flow can be put together. We've got, frankly, from the, on face value, like you said, Steve, the amount of lanes and drive-through capacity that Chick-fil-A provided was huge. And it was still shocking that they had such a bum rush of people that they were backing out in the street. I wonder if we have some language that suggests that they need to provide an engineered plan supporting that and it's not like there are people who specialize in drive-through design
Right.
out there that, are have doctorates in it that we can hang our hat on their expertise, okay? But we can rely on their professionals to come up with a plan, and then maybe something in there that indicates what their economic or their customer expectations are. I think Chick-fil-A knew that they were going to have a huge turnover or a huge flow of
Yeah.
people.
Mm-hmm.
And they chose to just kind of shrug their shoulders and we'll see what happens and we'll deal with it. But we could have something in there that says, even in spite of your best designs and your best expectations for the performance of your drive-through, there's a consequence if that fails and your drive-through malfunctions in that traffic's out in the street. It would be nice if we had a switch where we could say, you got to close it or something. I don't know. And maybe that's more of a police power thing. I don't know how that would be affected, but it's effectively what happened at Chick-fil-A was not necessarily a failed design, because the design's been working, as far as I know, for quite some time now, but a failure to plan for the amount of traffic that they were going to get. And if we had, again, leverage to, they claimed training, and I think that part of it was when they did get a trained staff, they were able to they were able to push a lot more sandwiches into cars faster. So, I mean, I think that's more the answer than trying to come up with I think it would be tough for you guys to write rules that a professional could realistically not just do lip service to.
Mm-hmm.
It's more about the consequences.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I would think if we start expecting some kind of an analysis provided by the professional that the developer hires, that's a great starting point. But we should not ever stick ourselves with being stuck with whatever their expert comes up with. We should reserve the right, obviously, to have it reviewed and by somebody that we shop around and find that's going to look out from the public's perspective.
Absolutely.
I also don't think, I mean, we shouldn't have to invent the wheel on this in Garfield Township. There's drive-throughs all over the country, and there's got to be some ordinances that stink, but there's got to be some really good progressive ordinances that know how to handle this, and maybe some of the, I'm sure you guys have contacts, and maybe you can try to get your hands on some model things that you understand are working and are well thought of in the places that have them, and share those things with us, and we see if we can make them work in Garfield or not.
Sounds good.
Is there a difference between the temporary, like with Chick-fil-A, they opened, there was a mad rush, there were problems, there were all kinds of things. I guess it remains to be seen what kind of summer we'll have this year, but I'm not anticipating that same kind of mad rush. So, I mean, do you give them 2 months to get everything together, or, there's a difference between the real process of their work when it's working and everything is working. And
I don't think we'll see too many other fast food places like that come in that have that issue. I do know that they are having problems. So and that's why they met with us to talk about that connection out to Lowe's and the mall and so forth, because they are at times shutting down the left turn lane to get out of there. It's the exiting, which is quite honestly what I was concerned initially was the exiting out of there being the issue more than just the backup, because I never thought the backup was going to be as bad as it was, but certainly exiting out of there and knowing it's really hard to get any gaps. So that's why they're really they know that they're not at a point where they're comfortable operating. They want that issue to be addressed, and they know the only way to do that is to have other points of access to that property other than that driveway.
Well, it will be nice to have somebody with an incentive to drive that.
Absolutely.
Right. And really the impetus for having multiple access points to some of these, and I'm thinking of all the drive-throughs over at Cherryland. Granted, they weren't quite as experiencing the same volume as the Chick-fil-A was at its opening, but all the ones at Cherryland, you have that shared internal access, and you have access points that are well-defined onto Garfield and South Airport, and you don't see those same issues of backing out into the street with all of those.
well, that would take care of our concern with Seven Brew there. That left turning out of there, if we were requiring another means of egress.
Yeah, I think that would probably make a lot of sense, is just say you have to have 2 points of ingress egress to your site to allow for there's different drive-throughs, but primarily for any fast food or type of one like that, you have to have 2 points of entry and exit for that site, and that is going to determine a lot.
Be a good idea.
And that's a really easy one to measure.
Yes.
They'll be able to determine really quick if they got those 2 points, and they might have to go to a different site for whatever reason.
Good.
Okay.
All right.
Steve, I think you were doing food trucks.
Oh, yeah. So food trucks, we have heard some proposals, ideas for doing food trucks. Specifically, we kind of mentioned it in here as just doing certain districts or as accessory to if there's another primary use. Specifically, what we've heard ideas for is where we've got like the breweries, but they don't have kitchens. Something like Brewery Terra Firma, which has been here a couple times. They've asked for a kitchen. We wondered if this might be something that might be a little more palatable and could there be something, you put parameters on it, like, is it its own defined space? Some kind of other limitations on it. I will say there was one of the by right site plan reviews that's come up is a place over on Cass that's going to be also a brewery, but that doesn't have a kitchen. And I believe they also asked us about doing a food truck, and I think there's been other ideas for it. So it's something that could be potential. The zoning ordinance actually has a definition for food truck in it already, so I don't know if this was explored in the past or it was just in there to have a definition for it, but we wanted to see, like, would that be palatable to consider that in places that don't have a kitchen, but as an accessory use, and if there were some parameters around it, if people thought that might be palatable, what might those parameters look like?
I'd like
Wouldn't mind seeing some, like a memo with some thoughts on
Yeah.
where, how that might, where it might be,
Mm-hmm.
and without exploring like how to rewrite the ordinance, but
Mm-hmm.
where are the places food trucks want to be?
I think we, this first thing comes to mind for me is that they're popular, and I think there's a time and a place that they're the right thing to do. I think we need to, as we look at when and how and where we permit them, that we also look out for our brick and mortar restaurants too, that are here and paying taxes, property taxes. Okay, you don't want to, take a place that's working hard to succeed, and they're an actual business in our township, and they could be harmed by a food truck coming in and parking next door, and they don't have the overhead that the business is going to have. I think we need to be cognizant of that.
Yeah, I agree. I think I was thinking of something very specific. I was thinking that this would be accessory to a situation, primarily I'm thinking of a place that may be serving alcohol, in this case like a brewery, and does not have a food service.
Yeah.
And that is asked for food, and it would be allowing for one. This wouldn't be like where they would be allowed to go anywhere within the township. It wouldn't be a licensing type of situation. It'd be, say, and I'm thinking of this because there's a couple places in the city that are like that, where they actually have a food truck kind of almost like attached. I'm thinking of like Silver Spruce or whatever. It's really like a small kitchen. Its capacity is limited by that truck, so it can't operate like a full-blown restaurant, or with a large commercial kitchen, but it's enough to provide some limited food source services to that type of business that they otherwise wouldn't have. And I would be very specific on where those, it would have to be an accessory. It cannot be a primary. It would have to be to some other, I would say, in my mind, I'm thinking, at least initially here, just if there's, a brewery or something of that nature that would complement that. I wouldn't see it to go to other types of commercial businesses. At least that's my feeling initially. And I'm thinking of in the case of Terra Firma, where we've had them come in front of you and they wanted to put a commercial kitchen, and were, with good reason, reluctant to do that. That was never in the plan. But maybe if they had a space for one truck that could come in there on a very limited basis, might be a compromise. It's an accessory to that use. It's not. It wouldn't be able to function as a, like a full-blown restaurant. So it's just a thought that if it, on a very limited basis, could potentially work. The one on Cass, that was the same thing. They're looking, it's a coffee shop and brewery combined, that if they had some, apparently they're not anticipating to develop a commercial kitchen for food service, so not like a restaurant, but to allow some limited amount of food service. And this might be a good, compromise to allow them to have that, but at a very limited way that would be permitted.
Well, there are more places than breweries, coffee shops. What about the guy who's got a fruit market and, he doesn't have a commercial kitchen there, but maybe he wants to sell hot dogs and put a food truck out there? What about, there are lots of different we don't want to just say, okay, well, you're terra firma, so you get one. You know, there are other things, you know, maybe at a mall, you know, the Seven Brew that's over there, maybe they want to put a little food truck there because, you know, they're there, you could have a cup of coffee and you can have something out of the food truck, and then you don't have to use these other places. I mean, there are lots of things to think about with that, I think.
Okay.
I think among other things, those were all good thoughts to me, but I think in addition, other thought would be restricted location. Probably make sure that if they're allowed at all, that they've got to be on private property, not on the street. And they've got to be on private property, but not like within
Yeah.
setbacks or any of that. So if somebody's got to have enough space to really put one there without bothering anybody else off the property.
Bathrooms? Do you need a bathroom?
Well, that's
You
what
have
I was
food?
thinking, it'd have to be,
No.
that's what I was thinking, is I would not see it as a standalone, I would see it as complementary to, it is an accessory use, it means it's attached to a primary use. That primary use would have to provide all those services in some form. That's where I think, like in Seven Brew, I don't think they have public bathrooms in there. I think that's just strictly a drive-through.
Right.
So that would be a way to limit that. But that would be my thought, is that it's more of like, they're just creating this portable kitchen that attaches onto it. But yes, certainly like a dedicated space on a site plan that says this is where this has to be, that type of thing.
Would you tie it into different districts, like the C district or highway district, but keep it out of some other ones, or? Like,
It would probably, it'd be limited to our commercial districts, certainly.
well, that's what I was, at Terra, when you guys keep talking terra firma, I don't think
It's not
they
commercial
haven't done
district.
anything
That's
that they're
No.
supposed
That one
to
is a
do.
PUD.
That is a PUD, but
Right.
it does have a commercial business, it's a commercial portion of a PUD. So
Yeah,
we could look at it that way.
Right, could be commercial.
definitely think this one
District
needs a
or
lot of
portion.
thought, for sure,
Okay.
you know, so I think it's definitely something we want to address, get in our ordinance somewhere, so we have it addressed, but, and not have it just be a free-for-all either, but good topic, very good topic.
Good, yeah. No, that one would be good to flesh out a little bit more. So there's a few other ones. We have a requirement for constructing improvements to, or for sidewalks or non-motorized pathways. This is currently in the zoning ordinance right now for developments or redevelopments with over 20,000 in construction costs, and that's kind of fairly low amount. We found a lot of the, we checked on the other side of the hall, the permits for, these were site plan reviews that were administrative, but the permit construction cost of some of these by right site plan reviews, where you may have seen some of these sidewalks go in, or they're under construction or coming up soon. So the lowest thing on there was 30,000, so that hit our threshold.
So
But a lot of
Wild-
these were well above that. Yeah, go ahead.
Wild Bills had to build sidewalk?
They will be, yeah. That triggered that requirement, so.
Yes, I'm curious about a couple things.
Mhm.
What year was the $20,000 value established?
Mhm.
And then just to say what's the inflationary
Right.
aspect of that relative to when it was established? And then what is the cost of sidewalk relative to all of these costs here?
Mhm.
And maybe this might be resolved to make it more, because it does maybe seem disproportionate if perhaps Wild Bill's is doing 30,000 worth of sidewalk, and, I'm sorry, $30,000 worth of renovation, and I don't know what the number could be, $5,000 worth of sidewalk, $10,000 worth of sidewalk. Maybe it might be better to have a ratio of the sidewalk improvements to the cost of the, so that if sidewalk improvements are less than 10% of your total cost of renovations, then you're obligated to do the sidewalks, but
Mhm.
somebody who's, and then that would, every year as with inflation or the increasing cost of construction, that would stay a relatively constant factor
Mhm.
versus the value of the 20,000.
versus like having to update that number every time with inflation and, yeah,
I like that idea.
yeah.
Makes
Yeah,
sense.
that makes sense.
I think it would be good to educate us, too. Chris's question, what's it cost to build a sidewalk? I have no idea, but we ought to know. And then how do we know what's reasonable to require from somebody if we don't know what it's gonna cost? The flip side is I don't wanna make it so that too many more things get built and we don't get the sidewalks. Because that's a shortcoming
Yeah.
township-wide, and we've been doing our best as time has proceeded to, bit by bit, we're getting more sidewalks, and we want that to continue. I don't
And
even
it's
want to
noticeable,
stop
too.
that. Yeah,
It's noticeable,
but
too.
there's still gaps, and
Yep.
it's painful to see those gaps.
Yeah,
I'd love to see them get filled in.
And just on the comment on that Wild Bill's, it's a little deceiving because that's actually like basically a 3-unit building with the Qdoba and the Jimmy John's and then the Wild Bill. So it's that ownership there. And so it will, while it's required, it does have the benefit of all those other businesses there as, that those other reservations have already been made.
And some of these might already have sidewalks in front of them, we don't know that either,
Yeah.
as far as that goes.
But at least there was kind of some initial data gathering. There was kind of a wide range depending on what the projects were, but
Are these all completed, or are these all planned?
there's a mix of completed and planned ones.
Most
in
of
there.
those
Most of them have been completed, though.
Yeah. The TJ Maxx one is going to be redone.
They will repave that section
They
of
will
the.
repave the part that goes in front of Kohl's and Michael's in the former Bed Bath & Beyond that's going to be repaved because its condition has deteriorated. The engineer just determined that it needed to be repaved, but, so that one is not yet done, and I don't think the Hammond storage is complete yet.
So I'm sorry, there's a TJ Maxx that's gonna move into that.
It's
Bed Bath and
relocating
Beyond.
from the mall
Bath
to
and
the Bed
Beyond.
Bath & Beyond.
They have put a sign out there.
Yeah, you'll see that will be on your June 12th agenda. They want a larger sign than, so you get that application next month.
Shocking, somebody wants a bigger sign.
Yeah.
Don't they say.
So that will be coming in front of you. But most of these have been done, and quite honestly, we've received some pushback, but most of them end up complying and putting that in. And I will say that part of what really helps us is that they do see others doing it, and that we have the plan that identifies where these are appropriate. Because it's not like we're putting them everywhere in the township, we're putting in those areas where they're more likely to be used and needed. So we're getting fairly good cooperation, which I have to thank the businesses.
Well, I noticed wasn't on there was TSO, but they probably haven't drawn a permit yet, so, because that one would probably be a big number, too.
Yeah, they will, once they get to that point, but.
Okay.
The one for bed and breakfast is just small. It's really a cleanup. It was mentioned last year when we did that to just refer to the same language that's in the definition for, instead of number of occupants, number of transient tenants. And since we had another bed and breakfast in front of us, just reminded us that that was on our list as a cleanup thing. You have on your desks something on vacation home rentals. So this is come up. If you want to cover this, that'd be
Yeah.
great. Yeah.
I'll cover this one. So there is a definition for vacation home rental in the ordinance, but it's not listed in any district. And I think it's just basically saying that we don't allow short-term rentals in the township, and that was supported by the appeals court ruling a few years ago. But what we have known over the last several years, that there's been movement in the legislature from time to time of legislation for short-term rentals that could impact the township's position on that. So to be proactive and talking with the supervisor and kind of monitoring that legislation, thought the idea of allowing vacation home rentals in certain commercial situations. So definitely would still not allow them in residential areas because they, in our mind, still are functioning as a commercial operation. But what they, just so it's clear on the definition of what a vacation home rental is, it's a commercial use of a residential dwelling where the dwelling is rented or sold for any term less than 30 days. the key piece in my mind in it, it is a commercial use of a residential dwelling. So it's not the same thing as a hotel or motel. It's actually something that was designed as a residential dwelling, but could have some commercial use of it. So the thought was that if we could allow them in these districts at a certain limited amount, because you could work around, and have seen developments even locally here, not in our township, but in other communities, where buildings have been built for the sole purpose of short-term rentals. So what we would do is allow them in, let's say, the CG, CH, CP, or commercial portions of a PUD up to a certain percentage. One of the things that why we were talking about this is that there was a feeling that some of the legislation that may come through would say that you cannot be exclusionary to short-term rentals, that you have to permit them somewhere. So this is our attempt to find what would be appropriate locations of where they could be. We do already allow residential dwellings in our commercial districts in a couple different ways. The commercial district housing development, which you saw recently there on Garfield and approved. The other one is we do allow limited commercial a limited residential in the commercial district when it's above a commercial business. So like where you might have an apartment above a store. So this is a way to thought process is to allow it so we're not caught by the legislature if they deem us exclusionary to this use. Just throwing it out here just to get your initial reaction. I can, in the meantime, also get a better sense of where that legislation is currently. It's a moving target. Right now, I think it's a series of several different bills, amendments to it, and we're not sure where that's going, but I can provide that to you as well. But it may be prudent for us to at least investigate this and see what we can maybe come up with.
Sounds good.
Joe?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that's probably wise, John, if we don't allow them anywhere in the township, that is exclusionary. And I think there's various types of businesses that have succeeded in getting allowed to go into places because the local ordinance says you couldn't go anywhere. I'm thinking of the sexually oriented businesses a few years ago, that was an issue. So probably to allow them somewhere might be smart, but where we've historically not allowed them anywhere, I don't know whether we'd want to go from not allowing them anywhere to allowing them in 4 different districts. Maybe one of the commercial districts, I don't know, I'd have to think it through. But I think the concept of not excluding them everywhere makes sense, but if we allow them in one district, then it's not exclusionary anymore. And I don't know, we need to go from 0 to 4, go to 0 to 1 or 2, but just a thought.
Yeah. And I think one of the challenges I always find is that from an enforcement standpoint, these things are really difficult, to enforce. A lot of our enforcement is on these types of things are typically complaint-based. So
Right.
they may be in existence and we don't know them until somebody makes a complaint.
Right.
But even if there was a certain percentage, I don't know how would we enforce that. Like, if they were allowed to go in, how do we know when they've reached that percentage? We have no way of tracking that, monitoring that. So, yeah, I would enter this in a very cautious thought process.
Although some places look at a licensing requirement and they allow X number of licenses, and then you can sort of count how many you've got by
Yeah,
how many
that's true.
licenses have been issued, but
And then you have to follow up on a regular basis. Somebody has to do some research. There are services that will identify for you if there are unlicensed Airbnbs, or some staff member can do that research too.
Yeah.
if you did the licensing and you're generating some fees by doing that, that would maybe help cover the cost of staff's time to try to enforce the doggone thing.
One thing I
Would
would-
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, just one thing I'd say was that if we think that there's any kind of legislation that's imminent, that maybe this come up the priority list a little further, so we deal with it, we get something in place before the legislation were to go through, and then we keep hearing about it. So maybe we prioritize this a little higher up.
Or would there be any harm in prioritizing it, getting our ducks in a row, and then crafting the actual final revisions to the zoning ordinance as after a law is passed, rather than anticipating? I mean, because it happens all the time that they go to pass a law and something gets slipped in that changes it at the last minute. So would we be better served to just kind of be prepared?
I think
If
the
we
difference
had-
between fast track and prioritize. Prioritize, let's deal with it, let's get something in print. Let's not fast track it.
The concern I would have, Chris, with what you just suggested is if the legislation takes effect on a certain day, and in that moment, our ordinance is in conflict with the legislation, somebody could come in and do what they want to do the next day.
The next day.
Before we get around to coming up with an ordinance. So I think we'd be wise to be proactive.
Okay.
If it
there-
becomes a use by right, if the legislation says it's a use by right, unless you have an ordinance in some other way, then John's right, we're gonna be,
Let's get it.
Yeah, we may have more to
I'd
learn. And the more you can try to forecast where the legislature's going, and I know that's not an easy thing to do.
Right, but no, we can look at it, it's, if anything, it's a lot more elaborate than it was previously. Before, it was almost kind of declaring that it's a
Yeah.
permitted use in any residential dwelling.
right.
Now they've changed the tone, some of the tourism groups are a little bit happier now because they would be having to pay into those systems just like hotels and motels do and so forth. And I guess my feeling on it is to go in this extremely conservative. You can always go back and, if you have something on the books, it's always easier to let up the regulation than buckle down at. So I think if we did, I would do, I do like the idea of doing it very limited, pretty tight right now, and then we can see where it goes. And if for some reason we have to change or whatever, or there's a demand to change and we want to, it's easier to lessen up those restrictions.
I like the licensing idea too, so we can keep track of what we have there. Not that everybody is going to go ahead and get a license, and some people will just go do it, but that licensing, and then maybe you can only have 5 of them in 1,000 feet, or maybe it's within a mile radius, or whatever, however,
Well, it's an accessory to the commercial
want to limit.
use. In other words, I don't want to see them come in and buy a commercial use, level it, and put a bunch of short-term rentals in a commercial
That's a
district
whole-
necessarily.
It's a hotel.
Right, it has, the percentage might be, you still have to have a commercial use on site. This is an accessory to a commercial use. I know there's a couple of examples in town. I know people that came to Traverse City and like a doctor's office, and then upstairs they have a little apartment for rent. So it's definitely something they allow, but I think that's one way to maybe control some of it. Just a thought. So.
Would we face the prospect of creating this use in a certain zone, and then, for example, the apartments above, the apartments in Olson's Plaza West immediately becoming eligible to be short-term rentals instead? Because we had approved that, excited about the prospect of additional housing, workforce housing. I think the same can be said of the project that you just mentioned over on Garfield we approved recently. Would that be therefore immediately eligible to go from workforce housing rentals to short-term rentals? And I guess that's a concern that I have as you look at it and make recommendations.
Yeah, that's why I think we definitely somehow want to
And
limit the
rural
number per site. And we do already have a density requirement in the bed and breakfast, which kind of functions like a short-term rent. And there's a certain distance between them, so we can limit density. So it's more of, it's not intended to be a primary use. It's intended to be accessory, and I think that's a real, important designation to that. So we can then put limitations on the amount, space, et cetera, density of them, that type of thing.
Be very clear that our biggest problem with that was in residential areas. When we started talking about this a couple years ago, the people were saying not in a residential area. I don't want them on Wayne Hill, don't want them around Silver Lake, don't want them on Boardman River, don't want, all the typical places, so.
Absolutely.
Michigan Township Association might be another source of some help.
Yeah.
They tend to be on the opposite side of the legislature on this issue, I think, so not all townships, but some, so.
Right, good, very good topic, very good topic. Is that a-
The only other thing that was on there as more of a long-term thing, since some of these others are probably going to be higher priority, was looking at the sign ordinance. The other thing we put in there is, it's something, I think, when we discussed this last time, I think there was kind of general consensus. I think staff, we think also getting legal review, and that maybe it could be something, if it's a more back burner thing, maybe later in the year. It could also be a request from the planning commission, perhaps to the board, if like they think we need legal review on this, maybe while we're wrapping up some of these other ones throughout the year, if we wanted to see, or just explore what would it take to get legal review of our sign ordinance. I think we sort of need an answer to that question before we proceed any further in that, but I think it would be valuable to get legal review of that sign ordinance.
That was good.
Yeah, I would agree, there needs to be legal review of it. I would disagree, though, about it should be on the back burner. I frankly think it's time to move it up.
Okay.
I sometimes am a pack rat, and I got too much old paperwork around the house, but I look at the planning commission topics for what we're gonna work on in 2020, or 2021, or 2022. The sign ordinance has been there a long time. I think it's time it's time to get looked at.
Yeah.
Not to minimize, all these things
Yeah.
are worthy, but I think it's more broadly impacting the township to improve and regulate the sign ordinance than it is to do food trucks and sidewalk permit trigger points or bed and breakfast, to tell you the truth.
Oh, and the legal review is something that could just be allocated to a consultant. And don't we already have, like a budget as a planning commission, or the planning department has a budget for some legal services?
Planning commission does for sure, yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, I would see just get it done.
Well, I can talk with the supervisor about that.
And I don't know how others feel about priority. But I, for one, think it ought to get moved way up, but I don't know what, I'm 1 out of 7.
At least getting the review done, that's a high priority, and then we can get some understanding on how critical it is based on the review. Likely it is pretty critical.
And that would take time to do that review, so if we're working on these other things while the
Yeah, the
legal is doing the legal
Take
review.
some time to do it, that's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah, we would still be responsible for the reconstructing it, rewriting it, going through the process and everything. We just want it in terms of the content and what is, appropriate based on
Yeah.
these Supreme Court decisions and so forth, to make sure we're,
Kind of like in lighting, signage the same way. Your ordinance needs to keep up with technology too.
yeah.
What we were regulating 10, 15 years ago may not exist, and there's things that exist now that we don't regulate. So
Yeah.
I did totally agree with John. Let's put a little higher flame under that one.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Good report and good topics.
Good discussion, thank you, everyone.
Yeah, good, very good feedback for us.
All right. Next item is new business. Any new business come before the board?
Nope.
All right. The next item is our second public comment. So now you've all been waiting to come up and tell us all about what you want to tell us. And so here's your next chance to do that. So we will open up public comment. And it doesn't look like anybody's running up to talk to us, so we'll go ahead
Up
and
soon enough.
close. We've seen that before. Any other business? Okay. Looks like our next agenda is pretty packed. We have the Garfield Township Master Plan public hearing. That's a tongue twister. The Potter's Home Retreat Bed and Breakfast public hearing. So we have 2 public hearings. TJ Maxx Plan Development Plan Shopping Center sign review. You just mentioned they're going to be moving over to the old Bed Bath & Beyond building. Tower North Wireless Communication Facility. I don't know much about that.
That's on the Elpers property there on Zimmerman, just north of Silver Lake Road, kind of where the old farmhouse there. They're looking, a tower company's looking to lease to put up a monopole cell tower.
Oh, okay. All right.
So that will be an introduction.
And that is a dead hill right there. You can
Is it?
drop calls on the top of that hill like crazy, so.
Well, they will tell us what kind of lighting they're gonna put on top of this pole. That's the biggest concern.
Yeah.
Yeah, we sent a completeness review to them. We're waiting their response.
I don't want one of those strobe white
Yeah,
ones
yeah.
there.
So there, that one for sure would probably fall into the airport approach.
Yeah, definitely. It's high
There, for
enough.
sure.
Provided
I
some
don't want-
correspondence from the FAA. So.
Is this one of those things that's somewhat of, it's considered some kind of a utility that we can do very limited amounts of regulating, or is this not subject to?
No, we can go through the special use permit process. We just can't preclude them. We can require co-location should it be reasonable. And at the same time, Steve's been working on inventorying where we have existing ones already, but for these new tower locations, yes, we can.
What happened a few years ago, they were talking about some other 5G or something, I don't remember who brought it up to our attention, but the board had somebody talk about it, and it was a Steve Dool at the time that brought it to us, but it was gonna go to a different technology where they were gonna have a lot more antennas, and they were gonna be lower to the ground, and, you remember something like
It was
that?
the 5G. It
Yeah,
was
they're-
it was the
Well,
5G
that never
technology.
took place, or?
No, they're slowly coming in here. I don't know where they're at, because a lot of those are in the road right away. So they're working with the road commission, and then the zoning administrator is also aware of those. But 5G has been kind of slow coming here.
So would these other old big cell towers be tore down when that gets implemented?
Not necessarily.
Because the 5G's data and the cellular is your
Okay.
voice, so it's
Yeah.
still gonna
Two
need the
different things.
towers
Yeah.
for the distance, you know.
Just as a side note, there's a tower over at West Middle School there that we believe, even though it's on school, typically things on school property, we don't have any jurisdiction over for zoning standpoint. But our zoning administrator is digging in looking at it with the state of Michigan to see if in this case, it applies to this tower, because the tower is not owned or maintained by TCAPs. So it's our thinking that this might be subject to our zoning. They're looking to replace it, basically swap in a new tower with the old one. So we're looking at that one, see how that goes. But from our initial look, it may not be subject to the state requirements. So it may be subject to local zoning, but we don't know for certain yet.
We'll look at that introduction on that tower next month. And the last one is the one you mentioned earlier, the Two Brothers Dog Park Cafe and Tap House. And that'll be a conceptual review, and that's in the Cherryland Center.
That's that
Correct.
Cherryland one, yep.
All right. Any other ideas or topics somebody'd like to add to the agenda?
Make
If
a
not,
motion,
Bob,
we adjourn.
we're adjourned.
I was gonna get knocked.
I'll drop you the note on 20s and 30s.